Ladies and gentlemen, this podcast today is brought to you by our Patreon page. Visit patreon.com/Gear Network. That's Patreon, patreon.com/GERE Network. And look over the memberships to subscribe. For as little as $1 a month, you could receive this podcast and every other podcast from January 1st of 2020 onward, completely commercial-free, as well as advanced releases of every podcast. If you sign up for as little as $3.50 or more, you not only get that tier, but you also get exclusive podcasts, exclusive content, including the brand new GNE podcast, Gear Network exclusive podcast, starring me, John Cimino, of course. So, again, patreon.com/Gear Network, completely commercial-free and exclusive content. Do it right now for as little as $1 a month.
The following is a presentation of the Gear Radio Network.
Ross from Vixen, and you're listening to the All Bets Are Off podcast with Robbie Vegas.
What's up, rock soldiers? Thank you for joining me on another episode of the All Bets Are Off podcast. Super pumped for today's interview. Mr. Richie Kotzen is in the house. You may know him from Poison, from Mr. Big, and a number of solo albums that we'll get into once we get him on the line here. But before we do, I do need to remind you to check out unchainedmuscle.uk for your workout needs. I'm talking t-shirts, leggings, gym bags, shaker bottles, tank tops, whatever you need, and they will donate to mental health charity if you purchase from that section, and our Vegas 20 will save you 20% at checkout. Before we dig into this interview, let's talk about the Nickel City Comic Con. You know we're going to be there and working with the con to bring you some updates as they come out. We know that you're already getting Sting. We know that you're getting Anthony Michael Hall. They've also added the total package, Lex Luger, and Sergeant Slaughter. So make sure if you're coming to Buffalo, you check that out. There's the HORRORFEST going on the ground level floor, the Comic-Con going on the second level. It's going to be a ton of fun. Check it out. They also have Rico Browning coming in, who, if you're a horror fan, this is the original Creature from the Black Lagoon. You don't want to miss something like that, people. I tell you that right now. So check that out. HORRORFEST, Comic-Con. Mark Dodson's going to be there. He was the voice of Gizmo and Gremlins, as well as some other Gremlins. And we'll keep, announcing more and more as they come. Go to the Nickel City Con's website for the pricing and the details. That's going to be May 15th, 16th, and 17th. We'll be on hand doing a podcast while we're there. Maybe roaming around talking to a few people. We'll see what happens. So without further ado, let me bring you Mr. Richie Kotzen.
Strong and lean. I lost all my inspiration to the devil's hand. I should have listened to my mother. She told me, kid, don't push your luck. Your woman's gonna leave you. Threw everything away. Tell me who I am, open up my eyes. It was all a dream. I was strong and lean. I lost all my inspiration to the devil's hand. I was all for her, she was all for me. I lost all her adoration to another man that she don't know.
All right, Richie, the first thing I want to do is just thank you for being here on the show. I truly appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, and it means a lot to me to have you on today.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I'm not nearly as busy as you might think.
It sure seems like it, because, 22 solo albums, man, you must be a pretty busy guy.
It's interesting. I've talked about this. I think the perception, I guess, must be that I'm always doing something and I'm always working. But the reality is I have massive amounts of time where I don't know what to do with myself. And it sounds funny, but it's true. And I think it's because of that I'm able to be creative with my music when the time comes for me to put something together. I call it a balance. And so if I were just on the road all the time or in the studio all the time, you'd burn out. So I think for me, it's very important to have those breaks where literally I'm doing nothing that has anything to do with music whatsoever. And then when I come back to it, I have a feeling of excitement and I can create new music.
Okay, cool. That makes sense to me. So now, I did say you have 22 solo records, so your inspiration that you get for those is in your downtime, more or less, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in order to, and it really has to do with the kind of music I write. If I was an instrumentalist, none of this would hold any water. But because I'm writing songs with lyrics, and I like lyrics that are conversational, I like singing about something that matters to me at least, I need to experience things outside of just playing an instrument. And so it's those things in life that allow you to draw from. And, also as a writer, it's interesting because I think sometimes people think that every song is something that happened to you, the writer. And it's not necessarily true. You can write about things that you see other people go through. Of course, you're writing about things firsthand. But sometimes, if you're this type of person, you can imagine a scenario and really immerse yourself into this imaginary world, and you can write from that perspective. If somebody writes a movie about vampires, they're probably not really a vampire.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. Now, this type of writer that you are and the type of musician that you are, where did that all begin for you? Where did you discover music and begin your own path?
I was a child, and my parents played music in the house. My mother was a product of the 60s, and she saw the Beatles when they first came to this country. She saw Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So those records and that music was always playing in my house. My father, on the other hand, was very much into soul music and R&B records. So he had the Four Tops and the Temptations and Sam and Dave and Otis Redding. So those were the two. The pendulum would swing in either direction musically in my house. And one of the first concerts, if not the first concert that I can remember, was Stevie Wonder performing at the Valley Forge Music Fair outside of Philadelphia. It was a venue that had a stage that was round. So at any given time, you could see the show from every angle. And shortly after that, I saw George Benson in the same venue. So immediately they became my obsession. And so I started playing the guitar and trying to play the piano and pretending that I could sing. And then I got into my own hard rock. I discovered Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and Black Sabbath. And then in my early teens, I was just a little metalhead. So, I have those are my influences, kind of interesting to go from George Benson and Stevie Wonder to Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually really cool. Now, was the world first introduced to you as a performer when you joined Poison in 1991 for the Native Tongue record?
No. So I was playing music live. By the time I was in 7th or 8th grade, I had my first cover band with my friend Corin, and we try to write songs, and we had the privilege of playing at the grand opening of my father's carpet store, and that was my first gig that I can remember. And then that band evolved into a full-time cover band. There was a fellow that lived back where I'm from who was much older than us, a drummer, very talented musician, and his name was Buzz. And he found Corin and I and formed a band around us, and we played full-time. And I started when I was 15, and I left when I was just out of high school, and we'd play up in the Northeast covers. And we did one original EP with 3 songs that I wrote and 2 songs that the bass player wrote. And then shortly after that, the band broke up, and I got a record deal with Shrapnel. So I made 2 records for Shrapnel, and on my second record, my contract was bought by Interscope, and they were a new label. They didn't really have much going other than 2 geniuses, Ted Field and Jimmy Iovine. And so I was one of the first people they signed, and they moved me to LA. And I spent a year here planning what would be my breakout solo record on a major label. Mm-hmm. I had already done 3 records by then, actually. So this would have been my 4th album in 1990 or 91. And the deal went south. I wanted to do this kind of blue-eyed soul thing because that's what I was writing. And they wanted me to make a hard rock record, and then it just didn't happen. So from there, oddly enough, I went in the other direction, and I joined Poison, which was a lot of fun for a 21-year-old kid.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I know that's when I first discovered you. I was just a little kid, and I got the Native Tongue record, and Richie's Acoustic Thing was one of my favorite tracks on that record, and I've been a fan ever since. So
thank you. Sweet.
Yeah, absolutely. After Poison, though, years later in 99, you also ended up playing with Mr. Big. So how did that come about?
That was a very interesting situation. I was in a band with Stanley Clarke, who you know as a jazz legend, a great bass player, and we had a jazz fusion band called Vertu, and we were making our record in San Francisco. And one night, I went down to San Rafael, and Eric Martin was performing, the singer for Mr. Big, and he told me that they were looking for a guitar player. Paul had left. Now, I've known Eric since I was 18. And I said, well, I don't think I can do it because I'm already in a band and we're making our record. And then I thought nothing of it. I went home, and then I got another call from Billy Sheehan, who I also had known since I was 18 or 20, 19, somewhere in that world. And he brought it up again. And then he came to my house with Pat Torpey, and I remember sitting in my dimly lit kitchen one night, and they were explaining to me, look, you really should do this. The band really, at this point, is only active in Japan and Southeast Asia. We can make a record, go do some shows, and you can still have your other band and do whatever solo stuff you've been doing. And so it just seemed like an ideal situation. And to be perfectly honest, I always wanted to play with Billy Sheehan. I was already in a band with Stanley Clarke, who's a legendary bass player. So I thought, well, this would be really perfect bookends to say that I was in a band with Billy and I was in a band with Stanley. So I obviously said yes, and that's what happened.
Okay, excellent. So I kind of want to talk about your newest album now. It's called 50 for 50, and that was in honor of your 50th birthday. You released 50 previously unreleased tracks to celebrate. How did that idea come about? Where did you brainstorm that up?
It happened very quickly. I was on tour last year. In the beginning of the summer, we were doing all the festivals in Europe with my solo band. And at that point, I had what would have been a normal record ready to go. I had 12 or 13 songs. And I had with me on the road a hard drive that mirrored my studio at home. And I started going through this material, and I was realizing, you've got a lot of songs here that just need a little bit of attention, and they deserve to be finished. What are you waiting for? So I started putting things together, lyrics, making notes of what idea I liked more than the next. And I had a long list of compositions, potential compositions that could be completed. And then I thought to myself, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. I'm turning 50 next year. What if I just released all this at once? The last thing that I want is to pass away and someone gets a hold of my hard drive and finds songs on there and decides to have their way with them. So I thought, I'm going to finish as much of these that I can, and I'm going to stop at the number 50. Well, what started happening when I got home, I would work on some of these songs, and as they would finish, I would come up with new songs. So the reality is I probably, if I had the time, could have made it 75 for 50. But at that point, I really would be in a straitjacket in a padded room.
Well, I guess that scratches my next question. I was going to say, did you find it hard to compile 50 tracks? But I guess not.
Well, and there's always room for more songs, so let's see.
Right. So the first song that you released from the album was Devil's Hand, and I wanted to know why you chose that song and where the inspiration from that song came from.
Well, I'm going to tell you, the most difficult thing, there were two things that were challenging. Making the music was not one of them. Sequencing the record, and then the second one, what do I lead with? Mm-hmm. Now, in my world of rock music, people always tell you in the industry, oh, you've got to come out with a rocker, something heavy, hit them hard. Well, the truth is I had already released 3 singles without putting a record out, and they were on the heavier side as it relates to what I do. And I thought, well, I don't have to stick to that stereotype. Let's find a song that just really resonates and represents you as an artist. And so Devil's Hand came to me right away because of the nature of the song. It kind of masquerades as a ballad, and then it turns into this whole other thing at the end, which I think is very exciting. But more importantly, in today's time, for an artist like me, radio doesn't have much relevance. I don't get airplay. I'm not a pop act. So if you put a single out, I need to have a visual. And the visual for me for Devil's Hand was very clear. And I had this concept of a person that had lost everything, just made all the mistakes, and at one time had it all together, but now is down and out, living in a van by the beach. And that's what we filmed. And this character was having flashbacks throughout the entire video of a happier time that may or may not actually have existed. We oftentimes romanticize our past when things happen, a relationship ends, and many years go by and you start thinking sometimes, this was great, that was great, but the reality was it really wasn't, and it ended for a reason. But anyway, in the course of the video, he's having flashbacks, and at some point he goes through a transformation. He's carrying a duffel bag that contains the one thing he kept from his previous happier life, which was a nice change of clothes, just in case. And he goes into the bathroom and he changes into these clothes, and he's back to his old self, and he finds himself in a jazz club and gets on stage and performs, and it climaxes with a standing ovation. He's getting all the accolades, and then at the very end he wakes up and he's still in the van. It was all a dream, or was it? So that's kind of the thing that made me decide to release that song first, because I had that visual.
Now, were you always that type of a writer right from the beginning? Because you're very much like, just listening to you talk right now, you're an awesome storyteller, and I could hear everything you're saying and visualize it at the same time. Has that always been like a gift that you've had?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think that's something that, time, people evolve. I think one of the things I don't sit around and analyze my life course or my personality, but I can look at a lot of people that were people that I looked up to when I was young. And now as an adult, many years later, they are still the same. I don't see evolution in these people. I see the same. And I think the difference from myself, somehow, I think I'm radically different at 50 than I was at 18 when I made my first record, or 24, or any other age. And so I actually like that. I like change, and I like evolution, and I like experiencing new things. So that's all I could say about it.
Well, with that being said, and all the growth that you've undergone through the years, do you still listen to, your past recordings, whether they be your solo albums, Poison, Mr. Big? Do you still go back and listen to those, or is it always on to the next one for you?
It's usually on to the next, but occasionally I find myself alone in my house, and I'll open a bottle of Camus, and I'll start to the drink, and before you know it, I'm on YouTube watching old videos of myself. So I do that sometimes, but it's usually only when I'm drinking and, maybe around the holidays.
Okay. So I do want to let the listeners know that you released this record on your own label, Headroom Inc., and you opened this recording studio in 2002. So how did that come about?
Well, I will tell you, I did open a recording studio. Many years ago, I purchased a commercial building in North Hollywood and converted it into a studio, and I named it Headroom, and I've since sold the real estate, and I don't run the studio anymore.
Oh, okay.
And yes, and so I kept the name, and so when I put out my records, I use that logo as my label. And so it's not a record label in the sense that I'm looking for talent and I'm going to sign somebody. I'm not interested in any of that. It's just something for me to call it and put my records. I mean, I could just put it out as Richie Kotzen Records or what have you. But, I'll say this about it. The freedom that I have now with my music and being able to have the technology to create something and immediately get it out to those who are interested is something I love. For many years, I was held hostage to having a record deal, and people were always meddling in the creativity, pulling me off course, pulling me off track. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't really feel that I was successful until I got control. And the first record I got control of was Into the Black. In 2006, I made a record called Into the Black, and it was the first time I made a full album without any influence from any record company. I did not take anyone's money. No one was telling me what I needed to do and what I should look like or any of that sort of thing. So, and so that worked well for me. And so I just kept doing it. I don't think I've had a record deal since then.
Okay.
I know I've worked in bands that have had, record deals, but as a solo artist, pretty much kept it that way since then.
Okay, very cool. So since we're talking about past albums as well, I know your last solo record, Salting Earth, also got a lot of praise, and it is a fantastic record. So I guess my question is after all this time that you have spent in the music business, do you still feel that your best is yet to come?
Well, I don't. No, I don't. It was an interesting feeling that I had when this 50 for 50 was finished, and it was like a feeling of satisfaction, but in a different light than I've ever felt before. Sometimes I would finish a record and I would be happy with it, and then soon after I would be thinking about, okay, what next? I don't really have that. I feel like. And it's probably too soon, I'm sure I'll get back into it again, but I kind of feel like very well represented right now. I like that feeling too. It's like, I feel like this record shows me in every light that I would like to be shown in.
Okay, cool. Very cool. My last question about that would be, has the tour started yet?
The tour will start in New Hampshire on June 18th, and we have 2 weeks worth of shows up right now on the website. There's going to be more. The plan is for us to stay out for a minimum of a month, a maximum of a month and a half. And then from there, I'll come home and regroup and then go to Europe in September and do a month's worth of shows. And then, I usually like to be home for the fall, so I probably will wind down November and December and then be into another year already.
Excellent. Okay. And over the years, you've worked with a ton of musicians, and one that I was particularly interested in asking you about was Gene Simmons. So were you a KISS fan growing up, and how did that even come about for you?
Well, was I a KISS fan? It's because of Gene Simmons that I became a musician.
Oh, wow.
And I can tell you, I remember being little, and I saw the poster, and I saw him, and I told my mother, I want that poster. And she said, oh, Richie, you're going to be afraid. You can't have that in your room. Those guys are scary. I said, no, Mom, that's KISS. Buy it. And so I had the biggest KISS poster in my room, and I was obsessed with Gene. And so many years later, somebody I knew referred him to my studio that we were talking about. And so I had a guy that worked for me, an engineer, and his name was Alex. And one day, Gene showed up, and Alex and I are there, and he goes, I need to play this. And he hands me a tape on a format that had been obsolete for at least 6 years. And I'm looking at Alex like, oh my God, what? This is like not really getting off on the right foot. So I got clever, and I called a rental company, and we rented one of these machines. And he spent, I want to say, a good 2 months working at my studio, and we became friendly. We had met many years prior. My manager, when I was in my early 20s, was working as a consultant with KISS. And I remember going to the Concrete Foundation's forum. There was a private party, and I walked in, and Gene and Paul were there. And that was the first time I met them. But back to the studio, Gene did his record there. I had a little bit of involvement. I know there was a song that I played drums on. I don't know that he ended up using my performance. I also know I played some guitar on some things. I don't know if he used that either. I'd have to look at the album credits. But, it was kind of surreal, joking around and having fun with, basically an idol of mine. It was very, very surreal.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm a huge KISS fan myself, so I loved every second of that story.
Oh, and last year, I performed on their stage. There's a festival in France called HORRORFEST.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I had a very, very good slot for an act of my stature late in the day. And I performed on the stage that was the KISS stage, and they headlined that night. So that was very cool.
That's amazing. Now, is there anybody else out there right now that you still would currently love to play with or work alongside or tour with that maybe you haven't gotten the chance to yet?
Oh, yes. Maybe someone from Iron Maiden.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. One thing that I thought that was really interesting, you actually opened up the Rolling Stones tour. I believe it was in Japan, if I have that correct. So
that's right.
How did you end up doing that? And again, were you a Rolling Stones fan, or did it just kind of fall into your lap?
I just called Mick one afternoon and I said, it's about time that you let me open for your band. And he said, Richie, you're right. No, that's a joke. I'm just making sure you're listening. No, I know you're listening.
Yeah.
That came about in a very kind of funny way, actually. I mean, I'll tell you the truth how this happened. I was involved with a company in Japan. They were a booking agency, so they did many of my tours. And they decided they wanted to be in the record business, so they contracted me to make a very specific kind of record. They had this idea, and they wanted to take famous Japanese songs that were tied to an animation series, and they wanted me to reinterpret them and re-record them.
Okay.
So I made this record, and they were happy with it, and they were talking in a meeting about how can we promote this. And somehow the conversation went sideways, and they said, oh, by the way, we've got the Rolling Stones tour. We won a bidding war, and we have the Rolling Stones. And I said, well, that's the answer to your question. And they said, well, what question is that? How to promote the record? Put me out on tour with the Rolling Stones. And so they're like, oh, wow, they're talking in Japanese. So what happened was they suggested it to the Rolling Stones people, whoever they are. Mm-hmm. And they went to my website and they listened to some songs and they watched a few videos. And they said, okay, we can have this artist open for the Japanese tour. And so I didn't tell anyone I was doing it until I did the first show. And then once it happened, I was calling home telling everyone where I was. Because in my mind, I figured, there's a good chance they're going to get there and they're going to say, who the hell are you? What are you doing here? But no, they didn't. And the only thing they said to me was, you can go anywhere you want on the stage. Just stay off of the ramps. And so obviously I stayed off the ramps. The other thing that was really cool is that I knew almost everyone on their road crew. And so that made, the minute I got there, I felt very relaxed because, I saw some familiar faces.
Okay, excellent. And I mean, like I said, too, you're no stranger to playing with just about everyone because you're also in a supergroup with Mike Portnoy of Dream Theater and Billy Sheehan of Mr. Big called the Winery Dogs. Are you guys still active? Are you going to put out new material? Is there any touring coming for you in the future with them?
Last year, we did a month's worth of dates in the United States, and it was really a lot of fun. And the conversation led to us discussing future plans. And we all agreed it would be nice to get into a room and start throwing ideas around as we've done in the past. So I would say in the foreseeable future, there should be something coming from the band. I don't know when, but I think we're getting closer to a point where you will see something.
Okay, cool. Well, I do want to thank you again for being here. That about wraps it up for me. I do want you to just plug all your social media, websites, upcoming events, anything that you want to talk about right now. I just want to leave the floor completely open to you.
Oh, that's sweet. I think we've covered everything. Obviously, the new record is called 50 for 50. So if you're really, really bored and you want to listen to a lot of songs in one package, that's the record for you. I would suggest listening to one disc at a time and treat it like 3 separate albums. And touring, we will be going out. The first show will be on the East Coast in New Hampshire on June 18th, and we will work our way down. We've got 3 nights in New York City at Iridium, and the tour is still in the process of being booked. Hopefully we will absolutely start on the East Coast and hopefully end on the West Coast. And then from there, I'm going to Europe. I've got a month's worth of shows booked there as well.
Well, I hope that tour comes through Buffalo because I will be there front and center. I truly appreciate you being on. I've been a fan since I was 6 years old and bought Native Tongue, so it was really cool for me to talk to you today, so I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
right, Rock Soldiers, so that was Richie Kotzen. Of course, you know more about him now than you ever did before. What a great interview, great storyteller. What a mind on that guy. I really enjoyed that, and I learned so much. You may know him from Poison, you may know him from Mr. Big, but check out his solo records. There's 22 of them. You can't go wrong. I think they keep getting better as they go. 50 for 50 is excellent. I've already ran through all 50 tracks. I hope that you guys will as well. Before I let you go, remember, if you're coming to Buffalo for the Nickel City Con, you will be meeting legends like Sting, Lex Luger, Sergeant Slaughter, and of course everybody else that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, like Rico Browning. So thank you for joining me. Make sure you check the link in the description of the show for Insane Labs. Our Vegas 30 will save you 50% on your gym supplements. You have no reason not to try these supplements, people. I will tell you that every week until I start getting you telling me, okay, enough, we tried them, whatever. Or, hey, guess what? Bought them, love them, gonna keep buying them. I've never felt better, looked better, been stronger, and I do believe in this product or I wouldn't be pushing it so hard for you guys. So, make sure you check us out next time on the All Bets Are Off podcast. This was probably one of my most fun interviews I've ever done. Wow, what a cool thing for me to talk to one of my guitar idols from, back when I was growing up and I was first starting to play guitar myself. Huge Poison fan that I am, so that was really cool. So, thank you, Rock Soldiers. Appreciate you always. See you next time on the All Bets Are Off podcast.
The preceding presentation has been brought to you by the Gear Network. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Do you like sports, interactive polls, friendly banter from two guys that probably shouldn't even be on the microphone doing this stuff anyways? Well, if you do, then you're in luck. Us two knuckleheads, Brandon and myself, comprise the Listen In podcast. That's right, Listen In, the podcast. We're talking sports, we're talking news, we're talking topical things, we're talking all sorts of things, my babies. And you are all invited to listen in right here on the Gear Radio Network.